Hello and welcome to this Q&A from the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce. My name is Henrietta Brealey. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer here at the Chamber, and I'm joined today by John Byrce and Malcolm Jones from West Midlands-based commercial property agency KWB. Today we're going to be talking all things commercial property trends in Greater Birmingham and KWB's market research and 2020 annual review. So, John, Malcolm, welcome.
Thank you.
Now, from your work, it is pretty clear that you're very passionate about the region and commercial property in general. What's KWB's story?
Well, thank you very much indeed for today, Henrietta. KWB was founded in 1989, and at that particular time we had just two disciplines, which was office agency and commercial property management. Now, since then, we've added industrial agency dealing with space within the West Midlands, manufacturing space and warehousing. We've got a team that specialises in a fit-out consultancy. So when Malcolm goes along and shows people around office space, we have a chap called Adrian Southall that can help him and the clients and the office occupiers who are looking at the space work out the costs and the specification and the project management and the move management. And he does that as a consultant rather than a contractor. Now, we're also seeing at the moment an awful lot of residential schemes going up in the city centre. These need to be managed, so we've got a residential block management team. We also do what you would call traditional surveying, which would be property advice for investment buying and selling, rating advice, valuations, rent reviews, lease renewals, dilapidations. And one of the things that we enjoy most of all is the search and acquisition service for the industrial and office market. We've got a commercial property management team that manages buildings within Birmingham city centre, out of town business parks, industrial estates, shopping centres, and we work for private clients and for fund managers. Now, 6 years ago, we started an FM and cleaning company, and we now employ 200 staff, and we clean office buildings and shops. Now, Malcolm, who is on the call, as you know, we act for landlords and tenants on the office agency business for city centre office buildings and also for out of town business parks.
Fantastic. Well, a really comprehensive range of services there. In terms of the commercial property market, now I find it endlessly fascinating. I think you can learn so much about an area by who's moving in, who's moving out, how the nature of the area is changing through the lens of commercial property. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about your office market research?
Well, for a business of our size, because we're not a corporate, we have to identify ourselves, and we have to do a little bit more than most to make sure we get our story across. And one of the ways that we've done that is to provide this research document that we publish on a quarterly basis of city centre and out of town transactions. And we produce a review at the end of the year and a forecast of the following year. Now, all the data comes to us via other agents within the Birmingham and West Midlands area. And then we put our own anecdotes and experiences into the review and the forecast. Now, we know that a lot of investors and other agents utilise this research when they are buying property for their clients within the West Midlands area. Now, we've been doing this for over 10 years, so we've got a fantastic database now, and ideas and trends of how the marketplace is going backwards and forwards, up and down, boom and bust, etc. So it's a very good service that we offer our clients and for the community in general.
Brilliant. So you really know what's going on under the hood of the property market in the area.
We'd like to think so. We'd like to think so.
So on that then, 2020, obviously a bit of an interesting year for all of us, full of change, full of dramatic disruption from COVID-19. How did Birmingham's commercial property market fare through all that? And, how does that compare to perhaps other areas that you work in?
Well, I think the answer in that is in two parts, really, because over the last 10 years, we've seen an exponential increase in the serviced office market. So I'm going to talk about that, and Malcolm's going to deal with the traditional office letting space. Now, we've invested and have had dealings with the serviced office market for over 15 years. So we like to think we understand it quite well. Now, to say that the marketplace, the flexible office market, has been hit hard is an understatement. You've only got to walk through Birmingham city centre to see how desolate it is, how many buildings don't have lights on at the present moment in time. And that's because a lot of the occupiers are now working back at home. And it's the same within the serviced office buildings. The licensees have gone back to the kitchen tables. They've gone back to the bedrooms, the garden sheds, and therefore they've lost big revenue. And some of them, these operators, they will just not survive. But the view is that in the second half of this year, once we've got a little bit further down the line, we think that that marketplace is going to come back hard. And I think that we're going to see a lot of companies who are sitting in traditional office space, and this isn't going to give Malcolm any pleasure at all, but we suspect there's going to be a lot of people within the traditional office market who are going to be looking even harder at the serviced office and short-term flexible market. Malcolm, would you like to continue on that?
Yeah, so in terms of the Birmingham market, there have obviously been deals done this year. So it's not as bad as actually I thought, because obviously if you can't occupy an office, you know, why would you relocate? But there have been people that have moved, they have upgraded their space. And I think more interestingly is that there hasn't been the amount of space come back to the market that you'd necessarily expect, because you suddenly see all the headlines, no one's going to ever use offices again. So everyone just moves out, that's the end of it, the office is dead. But actually what we haven't seen is a lot of tenants relocate out of buildings. They've held on to their space. And going forward now, certainly, you know, this year, every week we're seeing inquiry levels improve, and you know, there's more and more people that are clearly going to do something. And what's interesting is they're not just all going to go and downsize. That's not the conversations we're having. They might not know exactly what they want, but they're not all going to downsize. So in terms of the Birmingham City Centre, yes, the headline figures of who has moved obviously doesn't look great, and over the 10 years and everything else, the average, we are obviously sort of down on that. But actually, we are seeing inquiries that are coming forward, and we're not seeing loads of space come back with tenants simply going, no, it's the end of our lease, we want to move on. So we've had conversations where tenants have renewed on space, or, you know, just taken short-term extension to understand what they're going to do. So it is quite interesting that I think there's a lot of people that do want to come back to the office, and Birmingham City Centre will do well. The reason the figures haven't been very good is simply because, you know, there's no point doing anything at the moment because you can't reoccupy your office.
Well, just to end up on that, so I would say that the city centre and the business parks, they are quiet. There's no denying that they are quiet at the present moment in time. But you know, companies have now worked out how to work remotely, and they are doing business and they are being successful. And you know, a lot of people are quite literally looking forward to working back into their city centre offices. So you know, it's not all doom and gloom, Henrietta.
Well, it's always good to hear that, and certainly your sort of vision for the amount of demand that we're about to see as well, and that sort of return to interest in this after an understandably rocky year due to COVID-19 is a really positive way to look forward. And I think we're going to touch on future trends later on as well. Did you also want to touch on the Solihull and M42 market? Because I know that's another key area for you guys.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's the second biggest market. So basically, you've got Birmingham City Centre, and then you've got what we term the M42 market, or Solihull market, which runs from junction 1 to 6 on the M42. In terms of occupancy, we've probably seen more people actually in offices a bit more out of town than we have in town. That's not surprising, because clearly out of town, a lot of buildings are self-contained buildings. You can drive there in your car park outside, whereas obviously Birmingham City Centre is built around public transport. And also out of town, we've also seen, I mean, take up again is obviously a lot lower, but we've also seen there hasn't been a lot of stock out of town traditionally, and it's becoming less and less, and the availability out of town is becoming less and less. We'll probably see that slightly expand, but certainly again in certain size ranges, things like that, there just isn't the buildings to move to. So the figures, yes, obviously replicate what everyone's dealt with because of COVID, but also I think there aren't that many options for them out there as well. And maybe the people out of town have been using their buildings a bit more, as I say, because they've been able to drive to them and everything else. So yeah, so the two stories are both markets have been massively affected by COVID, but I think both will have people that want to get back to the office.
Fantastic. Good to hear, like you say, there's great opportunities, not just in Birmingham city centre, but that whole Solihull M42 area as well. Yeah. So if we take a look behind the headlines, that, actually not seeing as tricky a year as we thought we might, given the complete sort of move to working from home, driven by COVID-19 in many areas. So what actually sat behind those headlines? What were companies and sectors moving in or out?
So obviously the big deal of the year was the BT deal, which took just over 280,000 square feet, which was the biggest single letting in Birmingham. So for ever, I think that's right in saying, as in one deal at one time. So that was a massive deal for the city centre. Behind that, then obviously there weren't any deals anywhere near that size, because there hardly ever are. DWP took 50,000 square foot. And to be fair, the public sector has always taken quite a bit of space in Birmingham. So it's government departments moving around everything else. So we've, it's nice to see, them continuing to do those deals. And we generally see them sort of do quite a few big deals each year. So, that's as normal. I suppose the other thing that was very interesting is that you had two deals this year which set record rents for Birmingham. So both, so this is both Paradise, so Chamberlain Square we're talking about here, Knights, who are a firm of lawyers, and Mazars also. So they literally, one of them did the deal, which was the highest rent in Birmingham, and then the next one set the next rent. So those sort of companies are investing long term in Birmingham. They're Birmingham companies. They're looking for good space. They're looking for some of the best space. So it's good to see that people are actually still out there, sort of taking space, good quality space, and seem committed to Birmingham, really.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's amazing how much a relatively small number of transactions can really drive the market forwards and make such a big impact.
Yeah. Can I just make a comment about the serviced office sector as well, just here? We saw that one of the giants within the serviced office sector is WeWork, and they've obviously been in the news for various reasons over the last 12 months or so. And a lot of people have been wondering how they're going to fare through this particular time. Now, last year, they took somewhere approaching 276,000 square feet in Birmingham, but they've actually come back on that now. They were taking 3 buildings, but they're now only occupying 1 building, which is in Colmore Row. The other thing that we're seeing is that traditional landlords are now starting to get their head round making a bigger offering in the marketplace. So the traditional landlords are now starting to look at the service office world as well. There's a company called Hines, who are a big operator in Brindley Place. They're now offering serviced office space, managed office space, and traditional office space. Now, office occupiers really have yet to conclude how they're going to go forward. So at the moment, there's a lot of liaising that's taking place with their staff, Henrietta.
So potentially some evolution in the type of office space available in the city, but still waiting to see exactly what's going to come out of this. Brilliant. Indeed. So something that I found really interesting from your report, and I'll just go back to your slides here, was so looking at the 10-year average, actually, even though COVID-19 was a pretty rough year, 2020, actually the lowest year on record within that 10 years was 2012. So I wondered if you wanted to just talk through what happened there, really, what was really impacting the office market at that time?
Yeah, so 2012 was the end of the sort of double dip recession. If you remember, it was when we had the Olympics. So what we had was I suppose to describe it, a pretty ropey start to the year in terms of take up. But a snapshot over certain periods, obviously, it's quite difficult because it's just when deals actually sign up that it goes into the figures. So therefore, it does affect it really. So yeah, the start of the year was the double dip reception. Then we had the Olympics and everything was great. We all felt good. I mean, hopefully the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham will do the same for us next year. So yeah, so it was a bad year in 2012. I mean, if you compare it to COVID this year, or last year, sorry, I should say, the truth of the matter is that the figures for last year would be even worse if it wasn't for the fact that the big deal to BT fell in. But what we're sort of saying is that the market isn't, these are only snapshots in time of take up. And obviously this year has, last year, continuing into this year, has been a bit different because it's not a usual recession, because people haven't actually been able to get to their office. So I don't think the market is dead. I think a lot of businesses we speak to have become a lot more agile. They're still making money, you know, even under these, you know, almost ridiculous circumstances. And a lot of companies have adapted in the way they work as well. So John obviously touched on earlier about it. And there are clearly going to be losers and winners out of this. But actually, I think there's going to probably be, going forward, it's probably made companies leaner, smarter and everything else. So they're going to prosper better. And I think, you know, and that's interesting, going back to what I was saying earlier, is that a lot of these companies haven't given up their space, because I think a lot of them think, you know, when we can open up again, it's not like a normal recession where things just gradually take off. You know, there could be this massive bounce and we need that space and we need all the staff and everything else. So I think, you know, they're sort of holding on to that factor. And I think, you know, they're probably, a lot of them are very right. And some, you know, even during lockdown, some businesses do boom, don't they? It's it depends what you're in.
But can I just step in there? In the financial crisis, or the tail end of the financial crisis, we found that businesses were very sluggish to engage with us as office agents. But that's not really been our experience this time. Now, a lot of them have had problems in terms of paying rents. So our commercial property management surveyors have been in touch with these businesses on a day-to-day basis, working out rental plans and payment plans and service charge plans. But the view is that the second half of this year, we are going to be even busier, and Malcolm particularly, because he's going to be seeing people talking to him about restructuring leases and perhaps taking on different types of leases as well. There just needs to be a better understanding, as I said before, between the staff and their employer. And this is why this liaison is taking place at the moment, for people to understand, are they going to be working from home, or are they going to be working from their office, or a bit of both?
It's really interesting in that how much sort of business confidence comes into play within the market, and also really great to hear how much there is to be confidence about. We hear very similar. We do hear from quite a few companies who have been able to succeed during this time. I think the impacts of COVID-19 are very sector specific, and there are a number that have been able to have a really strong year, and others who are now looking at that pent-up consumer demand and, you know, all of those reports of increased savings in significant proportions of the population, and going, there's a real opportunity here. And as you say, Commonwealth Games just around the corner.
Yep.
Brilliant. So back on Birmingham, back on the sort of here and now. Obviously, Colmore Row remains a really hot spot for commercial property. You've mentioned it a few times, the city's central business district. But are there any other areas of the city that you'd sort of consider ones to watch, or that are already starting to show some interesting trends?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting, because Colmore Row has always been considered the place to be, and it particularly was probably when I started about 25 years ago. I'm not saying it's not the place to be anymore. That would be ridiculous. But it used to be Colmore Row, and that was it. But over the years, the area's certainly been extended. So you had things like Brindley Place happen, which have moved the core out. And you've obviously got things like Paradise, Arena Central, all around Chamberlain Square. So in some ways, it's quite interesting. Colmore Row maybe hasn't been what it was, but I think what is interesting is the big building coming on there called 103 Colmore Row, which was the old NatWest Tower, as everyone probably in Birmingham knew it, which is this giant thing growing out the ground. I don't know how many people have actually seen it, because they haven't been in the city centre. But that would be quite interesting, because that brings a new big building back onto what is a traditional street almost. And it's quite interesting how it'll tie all the other bits together, really. I mean, I think Paradise is a fantastic thing. I mean, you know, you walk around there, it's so improved from what it was. It's ridiculous. But it's quite interesting that all these things have been pulled together. They are all in the city centre. In terms of, are there other areas that are up and coming? I mean, Digbeth has been up and coming probably for 25 years, as long as I've worked in Birmingham as well. I think this time it's got some more momentum behind it. It certainly has attracted different businesses than would be attracted to Ucolmer Road, for instance. You know, and that's a mixture of things. They're, you know, sort of up and coming TMT businesses, tech businesses, stuff like that. They probably want cheaper rents than, you know, are in the core traditionally, but also there's a bit of lifestyle about it, and maybe Digbeth's got that bit of edge, and, you know, with a Digbeth dining club and all those things, it's quite sort of trendy location, really. So I think Digbeth maybe could be what the Jewellery Quarter was. But the Jewellery Quarter is an interesting one because it's gone through a change again. It was businesses wanted to relocate there. Now, actually, you walk around the Jewellery Quarter, a lot of the businesses have gone and turned into residential. So, and I think a lot of the sort of tech businesses and startups, things like that, they're no longer going into the Jewellery Quarter. They're probably going into Digbeth. So I think Digbeth will be the one that will probably see the most change over the next 10, 15 years, something like that. And I think it'll be quite interesting.
Henrietta, for me, the Jewellery Quarter is still a great place to go. I think it's a very vibrant quarter. We've seen so many buildings change, have been refurbished to residential. We've been seeing so many new schemes that have come out of the ground, residential schemes that are coming out of the ground. And that means that there's an awful lot of people living in the Jewellery Quarter, so many more than there were 10 years ago. And that is a huge workforce, and they're looking forward to the bars and the restaurants opening up again, obviously. But it means that you've got this huge workforce so close to the city centre, and that means that they can cycle and walk into the city centre so very easily. For me, the Jewellery Quarter is still a great location.
Fantastic. I do find the constant evolution of the fabric of the city absolutely fascinating. You know, I've only been here for 12 years. I say only, 12 years is a decent enough time.
Certainly is.
Yeah, even in that time, you know, I think about the developments that simply didn't exist, or the way the nature of areas have changed, and it's just absolutely fascinating. In terms of sort of individual developments, are there any that are coming to the market in 2021? You know, you've already mentioned a few that you'd say are particularly worth keeping an eye out for.
Yeah, I think 103 Conmore Road will be an interesting one because it's a new building in a street that hasn't seen a new building for a long, long time. The other thing is it is absolutely massive and dominates the skyscraper skyline. So I think that'll be an interesting one to have a look at. They've obviously got restaurants on the top floors and all that thing, and I think it will bring a new dynamic to Birmingham. Paradise will obviously continue, and that will be a big scheme because that's obviously going to link you through to Broad Street and Brindley Place and everything else. In terms of out of town, unfortunately, there's probably going to be very little schemes coming forward this year. They just haven't built them and haven't built them for a long time. So it goes back to what I was saying earlier about shortage of stock probably being an issue out of town. There are a few things out of town that will be pushing ahead next year. So Longbridge has done quite well recently in terms of building some new offices. It's an interesting one because it's obviously fringe of Birmingham, North Worcestershire, and they've obviously got land there as well, so that they do have the capability of building out there as well. Whether they go down the office route or not, I suppose, is to be seen.
You know, most of the cranes that you see in Birmingham, from our point of view as office agents, they're not office schemes that are coming out of the ground. They're residential schemes. And if you read Midland Insider, if you read Business Desk and the Chamber's own daily reporting, every day you're seeing a new consent for a new residential scheme. Now, obviously, Malcolm and I would love to be seeing more office schemes coming out of the ground, but that's just not happening, unfortunately. But what we are seeing now some sincere conversations relating to design and build pre-lets, especially around the airport and the M42. So although those speculative office schemes that we would like to get our hands on aren't really coming out of the ground, we are seeing some very meaningful conversations of some very large office occupiers seeking space in and around Birmingham Airport location. And of course, that location is going to become increasingly more important given the HS2 hub, UK Central, and the motorway network, the rail network, the airport, all on that doorstep. Over the next 20 years, we're going to see a massive amount of development taking place in that location. So there's a lot to look forward to in that part of the world.
Certainly seen some of the plans related to that whole UK Central area, which just look absolutely fantastic, completely transforming the entire nature of that area. So agreed, another good one to look forward to. Speaking of which, speaking of future trends, what's on the horizon? So obviously there's still a lot of discussion, as we've alluded to already today, about what the future of work is going to actually look like. You know, will it be more home working? Will it be local centres over city centres? Or actually, are we just going to see a bounce back return to pre-COVID trends? What are your predictions when it comes to Birmingham's commercial property market for 2021 and beyond?
I think there is, I think during first lockdown, a lot of people were sort of saying, no, this is brilliant, we'll all work from home, it's fantastic. I think over time that has slightly changed, and even some of the most ardent people I know who are saying, no, that's it, I'll never be driving into Birmingham again or getting the train into Birmingham again, would like to come back to the office in some sort of things. Maybe that's 1 day, 2 days a week. I think also it's interesting that, you know,
on the YouGov trends, if we want to have a look at exactly what predicted.
There you go. See, without seeing them, I knew that would be right. I think also what I was going to say was, it's interesting that if companies were so certain everyone's going to be working from home, why they haven't given up their office space, why they haven't rung us up and said, look, we've got 3 years left on our lease, we're never coming back to the office, can you go and find someone else for it? We just haven't seen that happening. And I think also it's very difficult to, you know, there's a lot of sectors where they need to have people in. So it might be 2-3 days a week that they have, you know, someone comes in or whatever, but they might all be coming in at the same time, because that's the whole point, to come in, see your colleagues, everything else. So can those companies take less space? Probably not. They might actually take better space, because that encourages people to come in. But I was speaking to a company the other day, and they were saying that they take on 10 trainees a year, and they've done it every year since they've been going for about 15 years. Last year they didn't, because obviously if they get the trainees in, then, you know, who are they going to sort of work with and sit down and everything else? So you can do certain things over Zoom and stuff, but it's not the same. So I think my prediction is that most people will come back to the office, and actually we are sort of creatures of habit, and unfortunately we'll probably forget all this very quickly, and just move on. And I think the city centre will be, the companies that were in the city centre before will stay in the city centre. I don't see them moving out to little regional hubs or anything like that. They're there for a reason, and mainly it's public transport. They can get staff in from, you know, wherever you are in the West Midlands. Your train will go into New Street or Snow Hill or something. So I pretty much see, once everything's back to normal in terms of, you know, the pandemic, we're not wearing masks and everything else, I pretty much see us staying where we were before.
If I could just add to that, I seem to recall 10-15 years ago, there was a massive trend for people to start working from home. And it soon became evident from the survey data that within a relatively short period of time, they got pretty fed up with that. And they went back to the office for the office banter and for the collaborative spirit that you get from working with an office. Now, this time round, it might be slightly different, because I think we're going to see companies, once they've spoken to their staff, they're going to see staff wanting to work from home and from the office as well. But is a company going to keep a desk available for that person if they're only going to be coming in 2 days a week? Well, that's pretty unlikely, isn't it? So that means that companies will start to have to think about hot desking, and that might mean that they may decide to start downsizing. But not everybody likes hot desking, especially in this particular period that we're in at the moment. So as I said before, there's got to be an awful lot of collaboration and negotiation and liaising with staff. But the one thing I do know is that people will be coming back to the city centre, maybe not in the same numbers, but the city centre is going to get busy again, and it will thrive again, in my view.
Fantastic, a really positive note to end on. And certainly I hear from a lot of businesses who say culture is key, and it is very difficult to have a workplace culture without a physical workplace. Yeah. So I entirely endorse your view there that things may change slightly in terms of the balance of working from home and working in the office, but there will still be a need for office space and still opportunities for the market in Birmingham. Brilliant. Well, John, Malcolm, thank you very much for sharing your insights with us today. Thank you all at home for watching as well. You can find more Q&A discussions with Chamber members on the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce YouTube channel. And for more information on KWB's regional office market research, visit kwboffice.com.